Good morning, and welcome to One Baha'i, that semi-regular blog where I talk about how the writings of the Baha'i faith apply to my own life and, well, just my own thoughts on them. As you know, it's nothing official. It's just me, One Baha'i. So, the last few days I've been talking about the Tablet of Ahmad and just sort of looking at thoughts that come to mind as I think about it. Today, I want to move on to the next sentence. Hopefully more. Well, we'll see. Where were we? Verily, he is the tree of life that bringeth forth the fruits of God, the exalted, the powerful, the great. I mean, obviously, I could talk a lot more about the previous sentences, but, I want to just keep moving on a little bit. You know, I told you a little bit last time about how my son was 3 years old and I would recite the Tablet of Ahmad to him every evening. What I didn't mention is that we had this deal. If there was a phrase or a word that he didn't understand, he could raise his hand, and at the end of the passage, I would pause and he could ask me about it. I mean, he would ask about words like sincere, believer, but one that got me was the tree of life. I mean, how do you explain the tree of life to a 3-year-old? Now, I'm of the opinion where if I can't explain something to a child, I probably don't understand it as well as I should. So when he asked me about the tree of life, it was a challenge to try to figure out how to explain it to him. And I've been told by a number of people that when I try to explain something to a child, it helps them understand it. I mean, the adults. So I thought about the tree of life that night. And I said, well, Shogi, the tree of life, I think, comes from the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve. I mean, almost every culture on the planet has a reference to a sacred tree. Not sure about the Inuit, but most cultures do. You have the Sadratul Muntaha in Islam and in the Arabic religions. You have the maypole in the Celtic religions. You have the tree that the sun dance is danced around. I didn't go into all of that. I talked about Adam and Eve. You see, I'm from a Jewish background, became Christian, studied the Bible when I was a kid, and we talked a lot about Adam and Eve. So this is what I shared with my son. He knew a little bit about it, but not a lot. And he knew, as I'm sure you do, that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and God said, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, because if you do, you're going to die. Well, you see, when Abdu'l-Baha was in North America, he told the Baha'is here that we had to know the Bible better than the Christians. Now, I don't think that means we have to memorize it, but we have to know it in our heart. We have to understand the deeper meanings. You see, the Bab said that whoever commits the words of God to their breast, God shall cause their heart, if it was that of a believer, to be filled with his love. He doesn't say commit it to your mind, it's commit it to your breast. So when I think of that, to me it means that we need to understand the spiritual implications, the spiritual teachings of the Bible better than the Christians themselves. So here we have the story of Adam and Eve. Now, Abdu'l-Baha gave us one interpretation of it in some answered questions. And as you know from the Kitabia Khan, there are layers upon layers of meaning in all the sacred texts. So Abdu'l-Baha gave one. I'm not going to share that one because he did. I'm going to share a different interpretation, a different layer of meaning. I'm going to add to those layers that we can understand. The tree of knowledge. Well, that's not exactly what the Bible says. You see, when you read Genesis at the end of chapter 2, God says, "Do not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for if you do, you will die." Knowledge of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, not the fruit of the tree of knowledge. You see, that slight misunderstanding, that slight misrepresentation is what led to the persecution of the scientists for centuries. It wasn't the tree of knowledge, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in the beginning of Genesis 3, the serpent asks Eve, "What did God tell you?" And she says, "God said we should not eat or touch the tree of knowledge of good and evil." Well, you see, there's a bit of a misunderstanding there. God didn't say don't touch it, He said don't eat of the fruit. But already there you have this interpretation beyond what was actually stated. So to me, that's a flag, that's a warning. Try not to do that. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God doesn't say, if you eat this, you will be banished. He doesn't say, if you eat of this fruit, you will, I will punish you. He doesn't say that. He says, if you eat it, you will die. Now, I'm reminded of my son again. A lot of things remind me of my son. Excuse me. When we were in the kitchen when he was a child, I would tell him, don't touch the hot stove. If you do, your hand will burn. It's not that I was a horrible parent and if he touched the stove, I was going to take his hand and burn it. No, it's that I was aware of the nature of his hand. I was aware of the nature of the stove. I knew that if the two met, his hand would burn. And I didn't want that to happen. You see, to me, God understands our nature. God is aware of the nature of knowledge, of good and evil. And He says that if you eat of this, you will die. And I don't necessarily think of that as a punishment either, as much as a state of awareness. You see, Eden to me is that state of innocent bliss, that state of the lack of choice. A child, for example, when they're really young, they can't lie. They don't know how to lie. The concept of lying is beyond their capacity. But as they get older, they understand how to lie. And they can choose not to lie. In the end, both actions are the same. The child who doesn't know how to lie tells the truth. The child who knows how to lie chooses to tell the truth. The action is the same, but which one is a higher degree of morality? You see, when you can choose, and you choose to make a good choice, you are showing more virtue. You are more advanced. You're more evolved. And this, to me, is part of the story of Adam and Eve. It is an awareness that we as a human race are now developing. We are aware of the difference between good and evil, and now we can choose to do the good instead of just doing it because we had no choice. But one of the consequences is that we're now able to die. And don't forget, Baha'u'llah said, I have made death a messenger of joy to thee. So part of this death, to me, is being able to move to the next world of God. It's interesting because at the end of that story, the cherubim is standing outside the gates to Eden with a flaming sword guarding the tree of life. Now, maybe it's just me, but I don't see that as forbidden. I see it as a test. If you want to achieve the tree of life, if you want to get to the tree of life, you have to pass this test. The cherubim with a flaming sword, you have to prove your worthiness to get past him to eat of this fruit. To me, again, this speaks of the same truths that Baha'u'llah says in the Kitab-i-Khan. You will be tested. And only when you pass these tests will you be worthy of eating of this fruit. You see, in this verse from the tablet of Ahmad, he is the tree of life that bringeth forth the fruits of God. Now we have a better understanding of what this tree is. The tree is the messenger of God. What are those fruits? The fruits that he gives forth are his teachings, his writings. That fruit is the tree, is the fruit of life. It is what gives life to our soul. It is what allows us to progress as humanity. All of this is about the movement of humanity closer and closer to God. And to me, that's a far more powerful story than mere history. Even if we take the story of Adam and Eve literally, it's mere history. What do we really learn from it except maybe to feel guilty? And I don't see that as a worthy lesson. But when we look at the metaphors, when we recognize that God said, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will die, which means that you can now progress to the next level of existence. He goes on and he says, we have to take them away from Eden because if they eat of the fruit of the tree of life, they will become like us. Interesting. If we eat of the fruit of the tree of life, God says that we will become like him. To me, again, that speaks of being like a messenger of God. And isn't that what the messengers of God are helping us do? Are they not helping us evolve and grow so that we can be more spiritual, more sacred, more like them? We are striving to become closer and closer to what Abdu'l-Baha was living. We are trying to exemplify the teachings as much as we can in our daily life. That to me is a far more worthy lesson than mere history. But then there's also the end of that sentence. Verily, he is the tree of life that bringeth forth the fruits of God, the exalted, the powerful, the great. It occurs to me that, and this is, again, it's off the cuff. I don't have anything written down. Those are my notes for today. I've already used those 10 words. Remember I said that I believe that every word in the sacred writings is exactly what it needs to be, and that when Baha'u'llah calls on an attribute of God, he is actually calling on that attribute within us too, in order to fulfill the prayer. The prayer, well, in this case, the tablet, is a command to go teach. As we partake of the fruit of the tree of life, as we eat of Baha'u'llah's teachings, we become more exalted. We rise to that higher and higher station spiritually. We move from being base creatures to being more spiritual creatures. And this is good. This is being exalted. As we do that, as we understand more about the writings, we learn how to effect change in the world, how to help humanity. We become powerful. Power is only useful in as much as it can change the circumstances around you. Some people think that you have to have money to be powerful. Well, that's a very limited sense of power. A greater sense of power, a greater power to achieve change is the power of the heart. The exalted, the powerful, the great. As we exert this change in the world, as we help transform civilization itself, as we help humanity move to a better and better understanding of the spiritual nature of the world, we all become greater, we become bigger, we become more grandiose. And isn't that part of the purpose of the Baha'i faith? to achieve a transformation both in the individual character of humanity and the social life of humanity itself. And here we have the key. It is to eat of the fruit of the tree of life. The more we study the writings, the more we put them into action in our own life, the more we see this change happening, both in ourselves and in the world around us. Wow, I think I'm done for the day. You know, I was going to continue on and start onto the second part of the Tablet of Ahmad, but I think that's enough for right now. So thank you very much for watching. Happy Easter. It's kind of a fun time of the year. Spring is happening. You may notice that the background is different. We had a study circle last night, or a study group last night, and I had to move my computer, so now it's facing a different wall, and I get to look outside as I'm doing this. And it's beautiful, sunny and bright. And I'm very grateful for all that. And I'm grateful for you listening. I would love to hear any thoughts you may have. And remember, like the video, evidently it makes it rise up on the ability for people to see it through YouTube. So thank you very much. Talk to you tomorrow.